Chapter 1: The Night the Wind Changed. Fort Worth, Texas, May 2001. Early summer pressed down in the day, but after dark the west side streets fell into a hush so deep you could hear the wind skim the oaks and crickets answer back. In a small house off Camp Bowie, the Turner family moved through ordinary routines. Construction shifts, part-time accounting, homework, church on Sundays. Unaware, life was about to split in two, before and after. Their eldest, Melissa Turner, was 17, quiet, warm, quick to help. She babysat cousins, smiled at neighbors, and worked nights at the 7-Eleven to chip in for school costs. She filled a purple diary with fragments and lyrics, loved 90s pop, and walked the same 8-minute route home after late shifts. The path felt safe because it had always been. On May 18th, she closed her register at 10:15 p.m. Coworkers remembered her sweeping the counter, slipping a light green windbreaker over her shoulder, and swinging an old backpack with notebooks and an empty lunchbox inside. Outside, the breeze stiffened. Streetlights carved uneven islands on the sidewalk, and the familiar felt altered, as if someone had rearranged the shadows. At home, Janet Turner leafed a magazine she wasn't reading, eyes bouncing to the wall clock. 10:30. 11. She told herself Melissa must have stopped to talk. By midnight, the house felt wrong. Too still, the living room chair beside Janet stubbornly empty. At 1 a.m., dread tipped into action. Janet dialed 911, voice shaking. "My daughter hasn't come home from work." Within minutes, Melissa's name hit Fort Worth system. By morning, flyers with her school portrait, brown hair to the shoulder, 5'4" open smile, were printed by the hundreds and taped to bus shelters, supermarket windows, and gas pumps. Officers canvassed the corridor between the 7-Eleven and the Turner home, while volunteers gathered at Western Hills High to form search teams. Students walked the grid with maps and flashlights, chanting her name under their breath like a prayer. A newscast carried Janet's plea. "Please help me find my daughter. She's never run away." K-9 teams swept the blocks, a helicopter traced wide arcs, divers checked the fringes of Lake Benbrook. By evening, more than 200 people had joined. Strangers brought coffee to the Turners' porch. Neighbors offered trucks and lights. Police briefed the press. Maximum resources, no firm lead. Doors that never used to lock turned tight before dusk. Fort Worth was not used to being afraid. Now it was. The second morning delivered the first clues. Less than 300 meters from the 7-Eleven, officers found a light green windbreaker in the weeds, dirt streaked with a torn sleeve. Near an abandoned bus stop, a single white left sneaker lay tilted in grass. A notebook lay open on the shoulder, pages shivering, blue-inked math notes across them. A black hair tie glinted nearby. Items were photographed, bagged, and tagged. Forensics plucked hair from the jacket and swabbed for trace. Technicians clipped material beneath Melissa's fingernails and sealed it cold. The picture that formed was stark. She walked, was confronted, fought, and then the trail ended like a line cut with a blade. A detective studied the dirt and shrugged grimly. This wasn't a runaway. It's a blitz grab. The case was no longer a missing juvenile. It was an abduction that seemed to start and finish in the same breath. Chapter 2: Rumors, False Trails, and the Long Winter. With evidence pointing to a kidnapping, detectives built a short list of people tied to Melissa's life and schedule. They started close to home. Jason Miller, 18, a recent ex with lingering feelings, sat through hours of questioning. His alibi held: a pizza place night shift, backed by the punch clock and his manager. He was crossed off. Attention swung to coworker Mark Daniels, who claimed he left at 10 p.m., 15 minutes before Melissa. Logs contradicted him. His last registered transaction was 10:18. Another staffer placed him leaving near 10:25. The lie triggered a search of his apartment. But in 2001, the technology could not wring answers from tiny traces. Nothing tied Mark to the scene beyond a discrepancy. A third name surfaced: Robert Hayes, mid-30s, a store regular with a history of harassing women. He was questioned, his house searched. He denied knowing Melissa beyond checkout small talk. No physical evidence emerged. Grainy store cameras captured only the doorway. No camera watched the street. The trail cooled. Meanwhile, the Turners learned to endure. Robert Turner rose before dawn, papering polls with his daughter's poster until his fingers were tacky with glue. Janet cycled through interviews, voice fraying but firm. She didn't run away. Emily, 12, wrote a letter to the police chief in looping script, begging them not to stop. In the kitchen, they set a plate for Melissa and left it untouched. Her bedroom became a museum to a paused life. Bed made, Brittany on the wall, purple diary on the desk. The hotline poured out hope and havoc. A woman insisted she saw Melissa at a Dallas mall. It was a look-alike. A man swore a red pickup lingered near the bus stop. The owner had an alibi, the truck clean. Worst were rumors that Melissa had left with an older boyfriend. Gossip multiplied where facts starved, and each whisper cut the family. Volunteers dwindled as leads decayed. The press moved on. By late summer, the file slid into the basement. Cold case, no progress. The years after were measured by anniversaries. The Turners' marriage buckled and ended. Janet kept the porch light on and Melissa's room unchanged. Robert worked and tried not to think. Emily grew up under a shadow. Once a year, an investigator opened the evidence box, tried a new test, and wrote the same line, insufficient sample. Wind and rain stripped the posters, memory thinned. Life in Fort Worth refilled the space Melissa left, except inside the Turner home where time stayed stopped. Chapter 3, Bones, Boxes, and a Door Reopened. A decade later, Fort Worth formed a cold case unit to revisit cases that still stabbed the city's conscience. Detective Laura Morales, tenacious, methodical, pulled Melissa's file and read until dawn. She asked to unseal the evidence box. Inside, preserved and patient, lay the windbreaker, the single sneaker hairs, and the fingernail scrapings that had mocked the lab's limits. By 2011, those limits had shifted. Morales wrote it plainly. Advances in DNA could squeeze profiles from what had been too small or degraded. She interviewed retired officers who had chased the earliest leads. "We always believed someone took her," one said. "We just couldn't prove it." Morales promised herself that if proof was stuck in that box, she would pull it out. Then fate added a cruel certainty. In 2015, construction crews near Lake Benbrook unearthed bone fragments, then a skull. Work stopped, the scene flooded with tape and tents. Nearby lay cloth scraps, a purple plastic bracelet, and material like the remains of a white sneaker, the kind Melissa wore. DNA from the bones matched the reference sample Janet had given. 14 years after that windy night, the Turners got the answer they had dreaded. The funeral was simple and devastating. Friends who had once searched in school uniforms returned with families, setting flowers beside Melissa's senior portrait. Fort Worth gathered in vigil, placing candles where missing posters had fluttered. The discovery turned the page from disappearance to homicide. With a body, a timeline, and a box of evidence, Morales had purpose. The case wasn't just reopened, it was reborn. She shipped the jacket, hairs, and fingernail material to a cutting-edge lab. Technicians mapped faint stains and sifted non-victim hairs. The prize was the tissue from under Melissa's nails. If she had fought, a sliver of her attacker might be there. Weeks later, a full DNA profile emerged. Male, not Melissa's. CODIS returned nothing. Morales pivoted to genetic genealogy. The profile went to GEDmatch. After family tree work and historical records, technicians triangulated one branch. The Miller family, long settled in Fort Worth. 3 brothers fit by generation. 2 fell away fast. One had moved to Houston and was out of state. Another was a Marine in San Diego. The last was David Miller, who had lived 3 blocks from the Turners. Morales scanned 2001 volunteer sign-in sheets and paused. David had searched with neighbors in that first week, walked beside the Turners at vigils, taped posters to poles, and blended into the concerned crowd. Witness notes from 2001 mentioned a tall, graying man near a pickup by the bus stop that night, a vague description that could fit countless men, including David. None of it was conclusive. All of it, paired with the genealogy, felt telling. Chapter 4. The Match, the Knock, and the Flash of Blue Lights. Morales requested surveillance. Detectives watched David's routines for weeks, waiting for clean, abandoned DNA. He favored a McDonald's for coffee. One February morning in 2019, after he left, an officer retrieved his discarded cup and sealed it. At the lab, technicians swabbed the rim and ran it against the profile extracted from Melissa's evidence. The result was stark, a match, indistinguishable at every tested location. David Miller's DNA was on the jacket and beneath Melissa Turner's fingernails. The warrant came next. At dawn, armored vehicles rolled down a block that had known him as a quiet man with a toolbox. A loudspeaker demanded he open the door. He shuffled out blinking, pajama-clad, confusion ill-fitting on his face. Neighbors edged their curtains. Someone whispered he had once handed them a stack of flyers to post. Cameras caught him led away in cuffs. Morales watched, resolved. In interrogation, David denied knowing Melissa and said he had joined searches because it was the right thing to do. Morales slid the DNA report across the table. He stared, jaw tight, then asked for a lawyer. 2 days later, Fort Worth PD held a press conference. The chief announced the arrest and introduced the cold case unit. Morales explained that evidence sealed since 2001 had yielded a profile thanks to new technology. CODIS had failed. Genetic genealogy had led to the Miller family. In the front row, the Turners clutched hands. Janet cried. Emily stared at the floor. Robert stood a step apart, shoulders shaking. News trucks stacked along the curb. National shows turned the case into a conversation about DNA and justice. Locally, people reevaluated a man they thought they knew. He had once stood beside Janet while she begged for her child back. The betrayal unsteadied the neighborhood. Prosecutors prepared for a trial that would hinge on science, timeline, and common sense. They charted the chain of custody from 2001 to 2015 to the 2019 coffee cup. Witnesses were lined up: neighbors, former co-workers, forensic experts, and Detective Morales. The defense previewed its play. DNA shows contact, not murder. Chapter 5: Judgment, Aftermath, and the Hard Lessons We Keep. The Tarrant County Courthouse was packed on the first morning of trial in September 2019. David wore a pale shirt and borrowed jacket, suddenly smaller than his reputation on the block he'd shared with the Turners. In the first row, Janet balanced Melissa's photo on her knees like something sacred. Emily gripped her mother's hand. Robert sat to the side, eyes fixed forward, face hollowed by years of wakeful nights. The state spoke first, pointing to the photo and then to the science. On May 18, 2001, a 17-year-old girl walked 8 minutes toward home, the prosecutor said. 10 minutes later, she was gone. Today, we can show you who took her. Forensic witnesses explained how evidence survived cold storage and how next-generation sequencing reads what older machines could not. A slide of overlapping peaks translated into a single truth. The DNA under Melissa's nails matched David Miller. Morales laid out the reinvestigation, time discrepancies in early statements, the rereading of reports, the lab submission, the genealogical tree, the cup, the match, the arrest. This was not incidental contact, she told the jury. DNA under fingernails is the signature of a struggle. Other witnesses added texture. A clerk remembered David's unsettling stares. A neighbor described boundary-pushing behavior that never quite crossed into a charge. The defense tried to kindle doubt. No video, no eyewitness, no confession. Contact is not crime, the attorney said. The prosecutor's rebuttal was crisp. Casual contact does not lodge a man's DNA under a 17-year-old's nails the night she vanishes. Jurors deliberated for 3 days. When they filed back in, the room went airless. Guilty of first-degree murder, the foreperson read. The judge imposed life without parole. Janet collapsed into Emily's arms. Robert covered his face. David did not look back. Justice, when it finally arrived, was complicated. It brought clarity and a measure of peace, but could not return what mattered. Janet said, "My daughter has her name back. Not a rumor, not a file number." Emily admitted she had grown up in a fog and now knew its shape. Robert, who rarely spoke publicly, simply said, "I hope she can rest." The verdict rippled beyond the family. Neighbors reckoned with the idea that harm can wear a familiar face. Parents talked differently to kids about safety. Not just don't talk to strangers, but trust your instincts and tell us when something feels off. The media highlighted the case as a milestone in genetic genealogy. Conferences invited Morales to explain the work. She always put the focus back on Melissa. Technology gave her a voice when silence had the upper hand, she told one audience. For the Turners, life after the trial was quiet and uneven. Janet volunteered with families of the missing. Emily studied psychology, drawn to help teenagers who carried invisible weights. Robert returned to church and learned how to let memories come without drowning in them. On anniversaries, they lit a candle like they had for years, now for remembrance rather than direction. The story leaves lessons worth carrying. Assumptions can wound, rumors compounded a family's pain and scattered investigators' energy. Persistence matters, from a mother's porch light to a detective's insistence on opening a dusty box. Investment in science is not abstract policy. It is a path to naming what happened and who is responsible. When a society funds forensic labs, trains cold case units, and uses genealogical tools with care and oversight, it tells victims they are not forgotten. Most sobering is the intimacy of risk. Danger did not come from a highway drifter or a monster at the edge of a map. It lived 3 blocks away and shook hands at vigils. The old advice to beware of strangers is not wrong, it is simply incomplete. Teach vigilance, yes, but also teach listening. To that inner warning when a stare lingers too long, to the friend who says a route feels unsafe, to the family that insists their child did not run away. Melissa Turner's story is not only a true crime narrative. It is a map of grief, community, science, and stubborn love. It shows how a city can hold a loss for nearly 2 decades and still make room for justice. It reminds us that a single, overlooked detail, a small sample sealed in a plastic bag, can be the ember that, years later, finally burns bright enough to light the way home. And if there is one final thread to hold, it is this: the quiet persistence of ordinary people matters. A mother waiting by a phone, a sister writing a letter, a detective reopening a dusty box. None of them could undo the past, but together they carried truth until it finally arrived, and they kept a light burning nightly.